Hello and welcome to the Chevron Renewable Energy Group Iowa B30 workshop. My name is Troy Schoen. I'm a Director of Wholesale Sales with Chevron Renewable Energy Group, and I'm excited to have you joining us here today. And we have a great group of panelists here live as well as virtually for us today, so excited for this panel today and glad you were able to join us. As we look at the 2022 Biofuels Access Act, there's been a lot of questions regarding that, and we're excited to address many of those today. So before we start, I'd like to introduce our panel. With us today, we have Grant Kimberly, Executive Director of the Iowa Biodiesel Board. We have Dave Slade, Chief Technologist of Chevron Renewable Energy Group. We have Mike Harrington, Bureau Chief of the Weights and Measures Bureau for the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship. We have Jennifer Weaver, OEM Market Development Manager for the Clean Fuels Alliance of America. And we have Mark Larson, Energy Consultant at the Rasmussen Group, based out of Des Moines. The Rasmussen Group is an Iowa-based company with more than a century of construction experience and expertise. Based in Des Moines, Iowa, the Rasmussen Group represents various multifaceted construction companies, with companies specializing in bridge construction, marine contracts, concrete and asphalt supply, paving, heavy hauling, dump trucks, crane operations, and fabricating steel. And they've been running on B30 now for a while, so we're excited to have them here today to give us some insight into how that's working for them. I want to let you know that at the end of this session, we will have time for Q&A. We'll talk about how we are going to execute the Q&A as we get closer to that, but there will be time to do that later. So if you have questions during the presentations, please write those down, and we'll be sure to address those at the end. Well, this is an exciting time for biofuels. With the state of Iowa recently passing and expanded incentives for blends of biodiesel, including the nation's first ever B30 incentive. Our speakers will walk us through some specifics that are associated with the 2022 Biofuels Access Act, including details on credits, labeling, and OEM information. We will also go over the benefits of using higher blends and hear from an Iowa fleet that has been using B30 and their results with that. So first off, I'd like to introduce Grant Kimberly. Grant is the Executive Director of the Iowa Biodiesel Board and Director of Market Development for the Iowa Soybean Association. Grant has been with ISA since 2000, having previously worked for Monsanto. He began farming in 1995 and is a sixth-generation farmer. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Grant.
Thank you, Troy. As Troy said, my name is Grant Kimberly, and I've been around the biofuel industry for a lot of years in agriculture industries, and so it's been a really amazing time to see all the progress that's been made over those years and to see where we're at to this point in time. So my goal today is to give you a little overview of the legislation and how we got there and where it's at today and what the credits look like, and then we'll go on and hear from other experts later on in the panel. Next slide, please. So last year, the Iowa legislature passed the Biofuels Access Act, House File 2128. This was a bill that was led by Governor Reynolds in Iowa, and it was supported by a coalition of ag and biofuel groups. What the goal of this legislation was is to rework and expand and encourage usage of biodiesel. And to move the blend levels even higher than what we've seen over the last decade or more in the state of Iowa. Iowa has always been a leader in biofuel production and usage, and this bill has helped move the needle further along the line, which is the goal of Governor Reynolds and the Iowa legislature. Next slide, please. The 2022 Biofuels Access Act included a lot of different phases and aspects to the bill. One aspect was to expand and extend the biodiesel production tax credit. Iowa is the leading producer of biodiesel in the country. We have production capacity of roughly 450 million gallons of biodiesel per year. So that would help to ensure that the biodiesel industry continues to navigate the challenges that may occur with normal market fluctuations to make sure we have plenty of product to supply to the marketplace. The Biofuels Access Act bill also included changes to the Iowa fuel excise tax differential. And so what that means is that effectively July 1st, 2024, blends of B20 or higher will have an eroding tax credit of 3 cents, a differential tax credit of 3 cents per gallon. So that means that if you use B20 blends or higher, that'll have a 3 cent lower fuel tax on that particular blend. That does sunset June 30th, 2030. Next slide. Other aspects to the bill was on the retailer tax credit side of things. In order to continue to move the needle higher and increase the blends of biodiesel, the legislature had to look at ways to kind of make that all fit within the budget. And so we had a current B5 to B11 credit that was set to sunset in 2022. And so the legislature looked at what they needed to do to continue to move the biodiesel blends higher. And so the new bill effectively moved the tax credit for blends of B11 to B19 up to 5 cents per gallon. That's through December 31st, 2027. Blends of B20 to B29 will now be 7 cents per gallon. That's a new credit. That will be through 2027. And then also a new credit was blends of B30 and above at 10 cents per gallon. Next slide. Blends of over B20 did not qualify for credits under the Department of Agriculture's established standards here in Iowa. And so we had to work through some additional regulatory language with them as well. And that was taken care of through the Rules Committee process, and that was effective as of this February. Next slide. Yes, B30 is ambitious in nature, but we see many users are already using it, and so we thought this was another way to continue to meet the goals of the state and continue to move the needle forward. Next slide. The great benefit of biodiesel and moving blends higher is that it lowers carbon emissions, and that's something that we're all hearing more about in these days. And this is a way to continue to extend the useful life of liquid fuels, especially in heavy horsepower and high-duty applications. So B20 blends, B30 blends and above, we think are going to be a great solution to help our economy, but also to help meet the carbon goals of the future. Thank you for the time today, and if you have further questions, I'm going to be available as well as part of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. That was a terrific overview of the 2022 Biofuels Access Act. As Grant said, it's first in the nation to incentivize B30 blends and 10 cents per gallon. That's a pretty lofty incentive, and one that I would think most retailers and fleets in the state would be looking to try to take advantage of. So thanks again, Grant. Next up, we have Dave Slade with us. He's with us virtually. As a reminder, at the end, we'll have an opportunity for questions. So if you have some additional questions for Grant and something he said, please jot those down and make sure you get those asked at the end of the presentation. So we have Dave here with us. Dave is, he's our chief technologist at Chevron Renewable Energy Group. He leads our technical services team, who works to uphold and improve product quality and production efficiency at Chevron Renewable Energy Group. He has been with Chevron Renewable Energy Group since 2007, and he holds a PhD in chemical engineering from the University of Kansas and a master's from UC Davis. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Dave.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'll apologize in advance. I'm going to give you a lot of information, but I think that it's all very valuable, and we can get to the questions later or at later dates if people still have additional questions. So, Hannah, are the slides up? There we go. All right, cautionary statement. We're not going to read this. This just says don't invest based on the information you're hearing today. Next slide. So, high-level benefits of biodiesel. Many of you have used biodiesel. Many of you are aware of biodiesel. I won't spend too much time on this, but the big benefits of biodiesel derive from two things. First is that it's an oxygenated fuel. By that, we mean the molecules actually have oxygen in them, much like ethanol. This contributes to the combustion quality, so you get much lower soot production, lower hydrocarbon emissions, lower carbon monoxide emissions. Soot means PM, particulate matter, diesel particulate matter, however you want to think about it. But those are really nice combustion benefits. It means you get more energy out of your fuel because you're burning it thoroughly instead of leaving soot or hydrocarbon emissions behind. The other big benefit from biodiesel that most people are aware of is the lubricity. As an oxygenated molecule, it actually resembles lubricity additives at the molecular level, and it behaves as one. So you're getting your lubricity benefit, keep your engine quieter, cooler, and less wear in the fuel itself without having to add lubricity additives like petroleum diesel requires these days. The other major category of benefit that Grant touched on is that biodiesel is made from biogenic carbon, or carbon that came out of the agricultural sector, and it is therefore carbon that has recently been in the atmosphere, was taken up by plants to grow, and it is not fossil carbon, which means we're not adding additional CO2 or additional carbon to the atmosphere when we burn biodiesel. That CO2 was already present a couple of years earlier, and in that regard, it is considered a low GHG or greenhouse gas fuel. The other note we have here on this slide is just be aware that 20% biodiesel has commonly been used now for many years. We're talking about B30 in Iowa today, but even B20 is very common. And when you think about the difference between B20 and B30, it's very difficult to come up with any fuel property differences between the two fuels. The only one is you could measure a higher biodiesel content, but all the other properties are very, very similar between B20 and B30. The last note, of course, being fortunate in Iowa and Minnesota and Illinois is that we have access to high quality biodiesel. This is because we have cold climate and we have been having to make very good quality biodiesel for many years now. So many of the things people worry about from biodiesel are based on 15 to 20-year-old production data where quality was different than it is today. So keep in mind that access to high quality biodiesel makes the whole idea of going from B20 to B30 even less of a non-issue, or more of a non-issue, excuse me. All right, these emission benefits that I mentioned on the previous slide are illustrated here. So those lines are showing the reduction in fossil carbon or carbon. That's the climate change impact that we've talked about. And then the air quality impacts are the particulate matter, hydrocarbon, and carbon monoxide. Keep in mind that in a modern diesel engine, Tier 4 engines, they do have emissions control devices. So there are lots of reduction in pollutants already. But one of the major benefits of biodiesel in a modern engine is the PM, diesel particulate matter that goes to the diesel particulate filter, is also dramatically reduced. So at B30, it could be 25% reduction in particulate matter going to your DPF, which means fewer regenerations and easier regenerations, and that should save fuel as well. We have some anecdotal evidence that there are fuel savings from fewer regenerations. And then, of course, if you or your company is looking to reduce your carbon footprint or your GHG emissions, biodiesel does, in most cases, especially in the Midwest, offer the lowest cost way to reduce your fossil carbon footprint. Certain states and provinces have better programs than others. Iowa leading the way now with our B30 incentive. These filters are here just to kind of illustrate visually what I just claimed from the previous slide. So these are a series of filters from some engine testing that we did a couple of years ago, just showing the accumulation of soot on filters put on the exhaust of a diesel engine. So it was a non-Tier 4 older diesel engine, but we wanted to capture the direct impact. And you can see with B0, the soot accumulates pretty dramatically on the top row there, including after 20 minutes, it's actually spilling over the edges. There's a stack of soot on that filter. B50, we see much less soot. And then with B100, we see even less soot. So think of that as illustrating that proportional reduction in soot that we mentioned previously. So this is visual evidence that what we're saying is correct. Next slide, please, Hannah. So now if we get to B20 plus, those illustrate what happens as we go up to B100. Next slide. Well, we think about who has been using biodiesel, and really, as I mentioned, B20 has been in common use for many years now, particularly in the Midwest, in Texas, and on the West Coast. There have been incentives that make it a cost-effective way for truck stops to extend the renewable content of the fuel, for many, many fleets to use. So when we talk about B20, it's really become a very common fuel. B30, as I mentioned earlier, is just an extension of B20, and really I would say it's difficult to determine any technical difference between B20 and B30. But just to give you some reassurance at the B20 level, Minnesota's had a summer mandate for B20. Iowa's incentive has encouraged B20. California, until a recent change, had used B20 in almost all truck stops. Oregon as well. The underground mining sector has had diesel particulate matter or soot reduction requirements for many years, and they've just been using up to B100 in the same types of engines that are used above ground. Indonesia, as a country, has mandated B30. They're in the third year of a B30 mandate, and believe it or not, they use the same type of engines there that we use here. They're considering going to B40, so that's been a success. And of course, we are seeing in Iowa and Illinois more fleets increasing their blends. So next slide. As a few examples of that, we see we've had 6 fleet customers in Iowa and Illinois using B30 to B50 in the summertime since 2021. So starting their 3rd summer this summer, been going very well. And then we had 5 more fleets start last year to do the B30 to B50 in the summertime. Among those 11, they've also extended their B20 use into the winter. And I will touch briefly on cold flow. Please be aware we're not promoting B30 in the winter. We're just using this as evidence that biodiesel has become a more seamless fuel blend component than people always have considered it to be. And of course, the city of Ames, Iowa, where REG's office is located, and us, our Chevron REG fleet, we've used B50 to B100 for 3 years in all of our equipment. So there are states that have incentivized biodiesel blends proportionally, meaning you get a proportional benefit to the blend level. Those states, of course, would encourage higher blending. Texas, we know of 2 fleets who've used B30 to B50 for over 5 years, and we've had a couple of different fleets in Oregon using B50 for the last 4 years. And as a final note, we don't have to go back slides, but there is an option to convert the fuel tank to a heated fuel tank that we've been using called the Optimus system, and we have been using B100 in our delivery fleet for the last 5 years as well. No other modifications, just heating the fuel. The states that have encouraged these kind of blends are shown, Iowa, of course, being there. Now Iowa leading the way with a targeted B30 incentive, but these are the states where B20 or higher have been used for many, many years. Next slide. So once again, we're talking about up to B30, but just to show some evidence that B20 does not necessarily impact fuel economy. This is a study that was done years ago by Purdue University, but it shows really clearly that switching to B20 did not impact the fuel economy of a fleet. There are 2 other studies we've seen that show similar results. Just know that even though there could be a slightly lower energy content in the biodiesel portion of the fuel, it's very minor. This is maybe a 1% level for a B20 blend, 1.5% less energy per gallon. It didn't show up in the fuel economy. And the reason we believe that is the higher lubricity causes the engines to run easier, cooler, and more efficiently. And then, of course, lower soot and particulate matter mean better combustion. So we're getting more of the energy in the fuel out for usable energy. So we haven't a lot of data with B30 yet, but we do have 1 fleet that has anecdotally expressed their belief that they get better fuel economy above B30 than with B0. I can't promise that, but just know that it's tied to the fewer diesel particulate filter regenerations on these Tier 4 engines. These DPF regens use fuel. If you don't have to do them, then you're saving that fuel. Next slide. So with that in mind, I'm going to show some images. The idea here is to kind of give some more visual evidence. This is not data on failure rates. There's 1 failure rate image, but keep in mind that we were curious as REG. We have seen these benefits. We've seen lower soot. We've seen better lubricity. We've seen better combustion. What shouldn't that translate to fuel being easier on engine and engine components? So we decided to just do our own testing. So we ran B50 versus B0 on a Cummins 2011 6.7 liter engine, and we ran it through a very extreme duty cycle. The graphic there to the right is just to show that this is a lot of accelerating and decelerating. So for every 40 minutes or so, it was accelerating, decelerating really, really rapidly. We wanted to minimize the time we had to run the fuel, but we also wanted to put it through an extreme duty cycle. It's called a refuse truck cycle. So for 250 hours in this extreme duty cycle, we ran these 2 fuels, B0 and B50. And we'll show some images now from what came out of that. First thing we had heard, next slide, was from folks in Europe about fuel injector deposits, also engine wear. So we wanted to kind of think about those 2 topics. So our engine wear testing, we looked at the lube oil, the engine oil, after the fact, and you can see generally magnesium and molybdenum, which are wear metals, were actually significantly better with the B50. Iron, copper, and chromium were about the same, but above there, the calcium and phosphorus were also consumed less, which implies less oxidation and combustion of the engine oil. So we are, excuse me, light saving here at the Chevron building in California where I am. So we are looking at less impact actually from the B50 on the engine oil, and of the very top row the viscosity change was actually less. So we had less of a viscosity drop, less wear metals, less consumption of calcium and phosphorus. So all in all, if you had to draw a conclusion from our data, you'd say that the B50 was actually easier on the engine oil than the B0. Next slide. These are now component images from within the fuel injectors. This is a ball from the fuel injector. You can see in the middle is a little diagram of the fuel injector that'll be repeated, but you can see on the left, looks like my B50 and B0 didn't get translated, but on the left is the B0, on the right is the B50. The ball on the left is dimmer. This is the ball seat where the ball sits. Once again, B0 on the left, B50 on the right. The if you don't mind, Hannah, real quick, go back. The seat discoloration and deposits were pretty visible there with the B0, and the B50 one looked brand new in my opinion. Next slide. The shaft here that also had deposits and stuff in the grooves, little bits of soot and particulates, whereas the B50 one looked good. That's down low. Next slide. The needle shaft also similarly less wear. There's a little groove there that was filled in on the B0 that was still clear. The machine groove was visible on the B50 side. Next slide. And then the needle tip. This is probably a little harder to see, but there's deposits on the needle tip on the B0 and the B50. It's hard to see anything. So what does that mean? If you go to the next slide, it really means that the injectors held up very well with the B0. This is a chart showing pre and post test injector testing. So the injectors are supposed to dispense fuel between those two dark lines, horizontal lines. We had all 6 injectors from the B50 pass pre and post. With the B0, we did have one of the injectors fail a post check, and meant more fuel was coming out than was supposed to come out, which would potentially be caused by deposits and lack of seating within the injector. So once again, hard to say for sure, but if you had to draw any conclusion, you'd say that the B50 was easier on the injectors than the B0. And the next slide is an exhaust valve. So this is also an exhaust valve. You can see that the B50 exhaust valve still had some shine to it. The edges look pretty clean, and the top surface of it wasn't completely full of soot, whereas on the left, the B0 exhaust valve has visible soot accumulation on top of the valve, and it's lost all that shine from the machine metal piece. It's just coated in soot. So once again, if someone were to say, I have a very low soot fuel for you to use, you'd expect results like that. Most people, when they hear that low soot fuel is biodiesel, they get very nervous. So we're here just to kind of find out if there's any reasons to be nervous. The last section I'll touch on very quickly is cold flow, and I don't want to spend too much time here because we're once again not promoting B30 for winter use at this point. But if you go to the next slide, we had never really looked at B20 blends or higher in the winter because we knew customers really wouldn't be very interested. But as we look ahead to a world where we might have more biodiesel used year round, we wanted to compare biodiesel cold flow with good quality biodiesel to conventional diesel fuel. So the blue dots are our cloud point results. I think you probably want to focus on the red X's, which is the cold filter plugging point, which is a more common parameter that people use to gauge their fuel use. You can see that as we added biodiesel to diesel A on the left, the CFPP, if anything, dropped a little bit and then stayed flat all the way up to B30. The diesel on the right is a lower CFPP starting point, and we did see a little bit of an increase. And that kind of leads to the conclusion that the lower your starting point, the more possibility that biodiesel might increase the CFPP. But at a typical winter pipeline spec diesel, which is the one on the left, we didn't see any increase. And last on this one, if you go to the next slide, we wanted to see what happened when we used cold flow improver. This is just the one that's available at Magellan here in Iowa and Illinois and Minnesota at the rack. And you can actually see that adding that cold flow improver to that diesel fuel, that was the diesel fuel A from the previous slide, didn't really negatively impact the activity of the cold flow improver. And it actually improved its performance a little bit down to about B15. And that even at B30, it was comparable to the B0. So good news, cold flow improver still works. As we increase the biodiesel blends above B30, we would expect the cold flow improver to be less effective. That's because there's less petroleum fuel there. Still not a good additive for biodiesel cold flow that we're aware of, but there are good additives for petroleum. And this just shows they do work with biodiesel in the mix. So last quick slide then. Today's biodiesel, just to reassure everybody, is different than stuff you've heard about or used 15 or 20 years ago. And I won't go through the timeline there, just know that there are things that have happened in the world that have led to biodiesel to improve its quality. And I'm going to say particularly in North America. So in the US and Canada, our biodiesel is the best in the world across the board. We like to think that Renewable Energy Groups is really even better, but I'm reassuring you all that the biodiesel quality here in the Midwest and in Canada is much better than it used to be. And that's what allows us to look at these kind of benefits, like using biodiesel at higher blends and using biodiesel longer into the year, even throughout the winter. And I will stop there for time, but thank you very much and hand it off to the next presenter.
Thank you, Dave. What a great set of information there. And I know you addressed many of the questions that those of you online had, because I've talked to you prior to this webinar, and I know that a lot of the questions you had, Dave was able to get to. But when you talk about emissions benefits of biodiesel, I think we're all well aware of those, but we have some of those concerns around fuel efficiency loss, around the durability of the fuel, and will it work in the wintertime? And some of these questions that you all have had, and I think Dave did a terrific job addressing those during his presentation. And again, certainly if you have questions, again, write them down, get them prepared and ready for the end of the session. We can bring Dave back in to answer any questions you might have. So next up, we have Mike with us. Mike is, he's Bureau Chief of Weights and Measures Bureau at the Iowa Department of Agriculture. And really excited to have Mike here with us today, because he's the one that goes around and tests those pumps and looks at what you have there at the retail outlets. And I know many of you had questions around labeling that Mike's going to be able to get to here today. So excited to welcome Mike here.
Thank you, Troy. As you mentioned, I'm Mike Harrington with the State of Iowa's Weights and Measures Bureau, part of the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship. I was asked to talk about any changes to labeling requirements for B30 in regards to retail locations, and that is very easy because there are none. It's the same labeling requirements that have been around for at least 10 years that I know of. So I'll just recap that instead of just saying there's nothing and walk off. But it's pretty much the only thing that is required is federally required labels. Iowa has no Iowa-specific labeling. It will just be what is federally required. So your blends of B0 up to B5, there's no label required. You may label, if you have a 2% blend, you may label that, but you're not required to. Blends 5 to 20% are required to have that blue FTC required label that says contains up 5 to 20% biodiesel or biomass diesel. So those are required by the FTC. Anything over B20 is required by the FTC again to be labeled specifically what that blend is. So if you're doing a B25 blend, a B30 blend, a B50 blend, you're required to have that B50 label, B30 label, whatever you're choosing to blend it at. If you change that blend, say going from B50 back to B30, you are required to change that label. The same thing if you're selling B30 and you want to go back to a B11 blend or a B5 blend, you're required to meet the labeling requirements of whatever blend you're at. So that's fairly easy. Any questions can be asked at later. Some of the other things that we do is we check the fuel samples at all of the biodiesel plants, the pipeline terminals, and at the retail locations to ensure that all of the fuel is on spec when it is being sold or being transferred from one person to the other. Pretty simple, pretty easy. If you have any questions, I'll be around later.
Thank you, Mike. Hopefully that addressed some of the questions you had regarding labeling. And as Mike said, if you have additional questions, again, bring those up at the end here of the webinar. So next up, we have Jennifer. Jennifer Weaver is OEM Market Development Manager for Clean Fuels Alliance America. Jennifer has worked for more than 20 years as a liaison between major engine manufacturers in the biodiesel and renewable diesel industry. She has a bachelor's in marketing and an MBA from Miami University and postgraduate education in advertising, public relations, and applied communications from Michigan State University. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
Good morning. Thank you all. Thank you for having me. As Troy mentioned, I serve as the OEM Market Development Manager for Clean Fuels Alliance America, which means I'm a liaison between the biodiesel and renewable diesel industry and all the major auto and engine manufacturers. Wanted to start here with slides today. If Hannah, you would like to go ahead and advance for me. So Clean Fuels Alliance America is the trade association for biodiesel, renewable diesel, and sustainable aviation fuel. We were previously known as the National Biodiesel Board. We expanded the tent a bit to represent all diesel, fuel oil, and jet fuels from oils and fats. That happened in January of last year. And as a trade association, we really work proactively to do research and development to continuously improve fuel quality specifications and to help us reach the visions, the volumes rather, that are envisioned by the industry. We also work very closely with ASTM International, the standards setting organization for our fuel quality. Next slide, please. So talk a little bit about our industry's vision. Last year, we produced a little over 3.3 billion gallons of biodiesel and renewable diesel fuel. Our vision as an industry is to grow that volume to 6 billion gallons by 2030. We're well on our way there already. And if doing that, we will then avoid over 50 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent greenhouse gas emissions annually. Looking longer term out to 2050, we envision our industry growing to 15 billion gallons by 2050. So that's going to mean higher blends and more volume throughout various sectors of the industry, both on-road, off-road, marine, rail, and in the air. Next slide, please. So some of the major diesel fuel industry changes that are driving our industry is a really big focus on carbon reduction. It's now driving the market. We're hearing from the industry that B20 now is really the minimum of what our users are expecting, both in on-road and off-road engines. They're moving more toward those higher blends, B30, B50, B100. We're also seeing higher blends being used and requested in home heating oil, marine fuels, railroads went over B20, and there's also interest in low carbon electrical generation using biodiesel as well. So our industry is doing the proactive research to be ready for those higher blends and getting them into the marketplace. Next slide, please. So I mentioned before those ASTM specifications for fuel quality. I won't go into too much detail on this, but suffice it to say that there has been a tremendous amount of effort over the past 30 years of our industry to continually evaluate and improve upon these specifications. Just some notable things here bolded in this list of modifications since the original ASTM D6751 spec was established for biodiesel back in 2003 or 2002 rather. We've added the low sulfur diesel grade and responded to that. We have put limits on biodiesel metals such as sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium. We added limits for oxidation stability to make sure that that fuel remains stable, continually improved those specifications. Back in 2008, added cold soak filterability testing, which helped to remove those minor components that can be bad actors and gel up the fuel faster in cold weather. That was an immense move forward for the biodiesel fuel. And then down to 2012, we added an additional 1B grade of biodiesel, which kind of equates to #1 diesel fuel, the cold weather blend of biodiesel for cold climates, if you will. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give you a really quick visual representation of how well the industry is meeting those new and more rigorous standards. So as I mentioned, that cold soak filtration test, the CSFT, most values now in the marketplace are of the #1B grade, or that kind of cold weather grade of 200 maximum year round anyway. So you're already getting a really high quality fuel that is meeting or exceeding those specifications. Next slide, please. In terms of the stability of the fuel or oxidation reserve, the average now in the marketplace is over 3 times the requirement in the ASTM standard for B100 of 3 hours. You can see our average there is about 9.4 hours. So again, very stable fuel, thanks in part to a lot of those other ASTM specifications that are also in place. Next slide, please. So the most recent change, this is very exciting, just happened, actually got passed a couple of weeks ago here, is a new low metals grade in D6751 for new technology diesel engines. And this new specification came about as the result of an exhaustive multi-year project, cooperative research program with Southwest Research Institute on and various OEMs, and the National Renewable Energy Lab had some contribution as well on the long-term diesel particulate filter durability in new technology diesel engines. Sorry, we're throwing a lot of acronyms at you here. So the exhaustive research was conducted with a lower level of metals than had previously been specified in ASTM D6751. Previously, that total was at 10 total parts per million for sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium. This new testing took place with 4 ppm levels of metal at the B100 level. We did over 1,000-hour durability test with these high concentrations of metals, and resulted in some very, very favorable results that showed that the new levels, the lower levels of metals worked very successfully, not only performing as expected with the ash accumulation, but also no problematic results on the diesel particulate filters as well. So these new research results were just published this month in a couple of SAE papers that are linked there for your reference, and enabled the industry to move confidently forward with changing that ASTM metal spec to the low metals grade of 4 parts per million total: sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. So you can have greater confidence even with B20 and higher blends that they're working not only on the legacy diesel engines that may be in your equipment, but also with these new technology diesel engines with the extremely tight tolerances in the aftertreatment systems. Next slide, please. So this is just a really quick representation showing you that the current B100 total metals for sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium are already in the marketplace far less than the new requirement even. So they are averaging out at about less than 1 part per million total, and the new spec is at 4 parts per million total. So this will be a relatively easy new change for our biodiesel producer members to meet, since the quality in the marketplace is already extremely high and meeting those specs. Next slide, please. So just kind of, building on the great quality data that Mr. Slade provided for you earlier, and referencing here, over 90% of the biodiesel volume that is produced by Clean Fuels Alliance America members is from BQ 9000 accredited members. BQ 9000 is our industry quality control program that monitors biodiesel producers, marketers, retailers, and laboratories. And so based on these monthly production volumes that we have reported to Clean Fuels Alliance America, over 90% of the biodiesel volume in the US is meeting those or exceeding those specifications. Again, thanks in part to those lower minor component specs, the 1B grade of biodiesel for cold weather, and also, rigorous policing, frankly, under the specification enforcement by the Department of Weights and Measures, by the IRS that's monitoring our biodiesel tax credit, by the EPA, all making sure that this fuel quality is up to spec and working as intended in your engines. So you really can take confidence that B100 quality really has never been higher in the marketplace, and any past issues have all but disappeared. Next slide, please. So looking ahead, what we expect to see here for 2030, 2050, and beyond, we are rapidly preparing for the new diesel engine regulations that are kicking in 2030, working closely with, again, our OEM partners to test the fuel in those new future engines as well. The results of these tests and the ones that we've just completed will be able to cover both B30, B50, and blends all the way up to B100. So we've got a technical glide path to get us there. Next slide, please. So I wanted to wrap up here with a couple of comments on biodiesel support by the automakers and engine manufacturers and warranty positions. So biodiesel is really offering fleets an easy and cost-effective way to significantly lower their carbon and reduce their greenhouse gas emissions today. as we mentioned, both in their legacy equipment as well as their new vehicles and equipment. And an important thing to know is that biodiesel is registered as a fuel and a fuel additive at any concentration, so B1 to B100. And the vast majority of the new diesel engines in the on and off-road markets are now having full OEM support for at least B20. Numerous OEMs have already moved all the way up to B100. And many OEMs are also recommending that biodiesel be sourced from, again, one of those BQ 9000 certified suppliers. They recognize that this is a really valuable quality control program for the industry as well. Next slide, please. Just a couple of examples of OEM support positions. Cummins, the leading engine manufacturer with engines ubiquitous in pretty much every market segment, recognizes that B20 is already, a very present part of their product line today. They are actively investigating higher blends, B40, B100. The president of their engine segment at Cummins is confident that, those levels of support are going to continue to rise along with consumer demand. Caterpillar also is already supporting up to B100 in the majority of their engines as well. So next slide. So just to comment quickly on engine warranty, there is a piece of legislation called the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act that passed Congress in 1975 that basically says that a vehicle's warranty cannot be voided solely due to the use of biodiesel. So even if the manufacturer would recommend a blend of B20 or B1 or lower blend, using a higher blend such as B30 or B99 will not automatically void the warranty. So if in the case of an engine or malfunction that is not caused by the fuel or related to the fuel in any way, you're not going to have to worry about your warranty being voided. On the right here, I'm sharing just an example of Cummins' warranty statement. And basically, it's saying that Cummins only warrants the equipment that they actually manufacture. They do cover anything that is a result of their material and workmanship. And this is not going to apply to fuel, whether that fuel is biodiesel or diesel fuel. Their position remains the same. So Cummins will not cover the damage caused by a non-recommended fuel. However, as long as the fuel is meeting those quality standards and not causing the problem, then that's not going to be a concern. So next slide, please. So based on the information you've heard from Dr. Slade and that I've shared here too, this confidence in B30 biodiesel blend should be strong. The robust quality control programs that we've got with BQ 9000 and with these ASTM specs, our new low metals grade of biodiesel, and the results that Dr. Slade showed that you can expect your engines to run pretty much very similarly on B30 as they would compared to B20, which is already showing great results. The cautions that I would give you would be to be proactive with your cold flow management in these winter months. Proactive housekeeping with, again, those cold flow improver additives and keeping your vehicles in a sheltered place. Again, making sure you are requiring ASTM grade fuels from your fuel supplier and buy from high quality suppliers. And you guys are very fortunate in the state of Iowa to be supplied by the best of the best. So I have every faith and confidence that you're going to be having very high quality biodiesel fuel flowing through your tanks. Next slide, please. Here is my contact information. I welcome you to reach out with questions either at the end of this session or later on, and also invite you all to join us for the Clean Fuels Conference taking place in early February, the 5th through the 8th, down in Fort Worth, Texas. We'll have lots more information to share for you there. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Jennifer. I've known Jennifer for quite a while now, and nobody has their pulse on biodiesel and its impact on engines and its viewpoint from OEMs than Jennifer. So I appreciate her being on with us today and having such an expert be able to give their thoughts on higher biodiesel blends. And it was exciting to hear her talk about how the industry has changed over the years. And I think a lot of times the biodiesel industry doesn't get the credit it deserves for having evolved over the years. People still have opinions and thoughts about what biodiesel was back in the early days of biodiesel. There's been a lot of change and a lot of technology and a lot of advancements in things like ASTM specifications, which have improved the quality of biodiesel over the years. And today's product is a lot different than it was back in the early days. And we heard that a little bit from Dave talking about the importance of high quality biodiesel and how that's what we're producing as an industry today. Also great to hear Jennifer talk about the warranty issue, because I know that is front and center on a lot of your minds, is will higher blends of biodiesel above B20 void my warranty? And we heard Jennifer say, no, it won't. That warranties, in fact, are for the equipment, not for the fuel, and that fuel cannot invalidate the use of a warranty. So good to hear that from such an expert as Jennifer. So up next with us is Mark Larson. Mark graduated from Iowa State University in 1967. Since 2012, he has worked at Rasmussen Group as an energy consultant, assisting with the purchase of fuel storage dispensing equipment, as well as natural gas and solar projects. So I'd like to welcome Mark up here to the podium, and we're going to share the podium here. And I do want to remind you as he comes up that now's the time to go ahead and put your questions in the chat. So if you haven't already, go ahead and submit your questions in the chat feature there on the webinar. Those will be passed up to me, and we'll be able to facilitate those to our excellent panel of speakers here as we move forward. So please go ahead and put those in the chat. Now's the time. So Mark, thanks for being here today. Really glad to have you here. You've been using higher blends of biodiesel above B20 for a while now. How long have you been using above B20 blends?
It first became available in early part of April, and so we've been using B30. We did start with a B5 earlier, 5 years ago or so. Went to a B11, a B20, and of course now B30.
I've heard these stories about, when people start using biodiesel in their fleets, that they hear from their mechanics and their other folks about, all of these issues, whether perceived or real. Did you experience any of that with your mechanics? Was there any internal, selling you had to do to get people to accept using higher blends of biodiesel within your company?
The only thing I would think of is that we were told earlier that it's kind of a cleaning agent. And we receive all of our bio through bulk transports in large storage tanks. And we could experience some cleaning, and we may need to change our filters a little bit often. Other than that, we have not had any other issues.
Excellent. What are some of the benefits that you've seen as a result of using higher blends of biodiesel over the years?
Well, number one, it's got a lot more lubricity. We do feel like our engines are going to last longer, and we'll have less downtime.
Mm-hmm. And have you seen that in some of the results of your equipment?
Well, at the present time, like I said, we just haven't experienced any real difficulties. Nothing's really happened. So I guess I just haven't got any really negative thoughts about it.
Yeah. What about, Jennifer brought up the warranty issue. I know that's front and center on a lot of folks' minds. Is that something you investigated? Did you work with your OEM at all around that question? Or what's your thought on the potential of warranties being voided as a result of using higher blends of B20?
It did come up quite frequently in our early discussions. And so far, our relationship with our OEMs right now, we have not had any issues. And I guess, as she brought out earlier, we don't think it's going to be fuel related, so we just haven't experienced anything yet.
Mm-hmm. And how many trucks are running on B30 today in your operation?
We of course, we own the concrete business, the asphalt production. And so we have about 150 over-the-road vehicles delivering concrete, asphalt, and then aggregate to the construction industry. In addition, we have about 50 construction units. They're off-road units, and they're basically just construction industry.
What would you say to somebody else in your industry or outside of your industry who's considering using higher blends of biodiesel?
Well, we have not experienced a problem, so I guess I wouldn't, some of those fears that you hear, there's going to be problems, we just haven't had them. So I just encourage people to go ahead, especially what Grant brought out earlier. There's a considerable cost savings to it, so even a B20 or a B30, either one.
Yeah. Well, talk a little bit about what that has maybe brought to your organization and your company. I'm assuming being a fuel consultant, it looks favorable when you're able to bring those kind of cost savings back to your broader organization. Have you experienced some of that?
Well, We use in excess of 1 million gallons of bio. And if you do the math, it's pretty obvious that it goes to the bottom line too. If there's no other problems, it's just kind of a no-brainer.
I know you're well connected within the fleet industry in Iowa. You're part of other groups and associations. What do those folks say about the B30? Have you heard any comments amongst those groups, whether positive or negative, towards going to B30?
I really haven't. Of course, I don't know if we've heard it all yet. Of course, B30 just became available. And so, no, we really haven't had any other comments.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you being here, Mark, and I'm glad to have you here. And I think we've had a few questions come in, so I want to get to those to make sure we stay on time here. One question that came in was one of the biggest concerns they had in offering B30 at a retail location was that the fleets wouldn't fill up there, that they would go to one of their competitors because of the OEM warranty issue. We certainly heard about the OEM warranty issue from Jennifer, and then we heard hear from Mark about a fleet and their concerns. Jennifer, maybe if I could turn it over to you if you're still on here. Talk a little bit further around this concern that came in around the B30 voiding the warranty.
Sure, thank you, Troy. Having worked with OEMs for the past 20 plus years, I've been in boardrooms and lots of conversations with them over the years. And, I just wanted to kind of reemphasize the fact that biodiesel is a registered fuel in any concentration, both as a blend stock as well as, a straight on fuel itself. OEMs, again, are only warranting the equipment that they manufacture for parts and workmanship. So their position on biodiesel fuel is the same as their position on diesel fuel. As long as you're putting high quality fuel into their equipment and it is functioning as intended, you shouldn't have a problem with your warranty. I think that there is an opportunity in Iowa, though, as this new B30 incentive takes place, to do some education at the retail level and help to reassure customers that the fuel that they're putting in their tank is an extremely clean, low carbon fuel that has been thoroughly tested and is fit for performance in their vehicles. If there is a concern, a problem that would result that is found to be caused by the fuel, which is, again, very, very unlikely, they do have the recourse of going to the fuel seller of that fuel to get that matter resolved. But again, the OEM warranty position is not going to change because OEMs don't warranty fuel, again, whether that is diesel fuel or biodiesel or gasoline or any other thing. So I would say that, there's opportunities for education, but you can really take confidence that the fuel being pumped through the state of Iowa and elsewhere across the United States is already going to be meeting very, very rigorous quality standards that we have worked closely with the OEMs to put into place to make sure it's fit for purpose in their engines. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Jennifer. I have another question for you, so I'm going to keep you front and center here. So you had mentioned during your presentation that 90% of the biodiesel production across the country is BQ 9000 accredited and has gone through that program. That is really a program that I know us in the industry have pointed towards as a changing point in quality of biodiesel once that program got put in place. There's still 10% out there that aren't accredited. Are they seeking accreditation, or what do you see as a future for those 10% of producers out there that maybe aren't accredited today?
I think that fuel producers, again, with so much of the market being focused on low carbon and decarbonization efforts, there's a lot of equipment out there that is still diesel engine powered. And so fuel providers are realizing that in order to serve that need and to be able to provide low carbon fuels, they're going to need to step up to the plate and make sure that their high quality or their fuel meets those quality standards as well. I will clarify that the 90% figure is a result of BQ 9000 certified companies that are members of Clean Fuels Alliance America. Frankly, a good share of that other 10% are either members that companies that are not members of Clean Fuels, or maybe just smaller scale producers that just haven't quite gotten there yet, but that are realizing the need to get there. So the vast majority of the volume of biodiesel that's being produced and sold in North America, again, are by member companies of Clean Fuels and also members of the BQ 9000, or I should say certified under the BQ 9000 program.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, it's important to remember that everyone is, has to meet an ASTM standard, so that, is there. And then when you look at the accreditation program, it's always your right as a user of biodiesel to ask your terminal location or ask your producer where you're buying biodiesel from if they're BQ 9000 accredited or not. And just ask that question, and then you'll have the answer for that. So thank you, Jennifer. Have a question that came in here that I think Mike will be terrific in answering. The current labeling law states that anything above B20 must be labeled with the exact biodiesel blend amount. What if my blending system is off and what I'm offering is 5 or 10% off what I have listed on the label? Will I be penalized?
So you're required to label exactly what it is. So if you are aware that your blending system is off, or if blends are not available, or if weather changes and you want to change that blending percentage, whatever reason you think that you might be off, you're required to have it labeled for what it is. So you would be safe in going out, changing the labels back to a B5 to 20 if your blend is going to fall into that. Or if you have no biodiesel blending capabilities at your station, then just remove the label altogether. If an Iowa Weights and Measures official comes and takes a sample and we find it off, we're just going to issue a notice and a warning for you to go out and fix your labels or to make the blending within compliance of what you're labeling. Again, we have no Iowa-specific labels, so there's not going to be an Iowa fine associated with that. Because it's a federal fine, whether you're breaking not complying with a federal, an FTC, or an EPA label, I can't speak as to whether or not they will issue a fine or not. I do not know of any fines that have ever been issued in Iowa by FTC or EPA, but I can't speak onto that. So just try and watch your blending, make sure that you're labeling what you know that you're selling.
So if I want to go to a B30, but for some reason mine tests out at a B28, what's my concern? Is there issues that I'll be facing, or?
An Iowa Weights and Measures official would ask to see your bills of lading, your delivery tickets, your drop tickets. We would check to see that you're purchasing and you're intending to fall within that. We would probably do some subsequent testing, whether it's at the blender pump or the dispenser, or whether it's a tank sample, to see if any of those are accurate. If it keeps coming back low, then we might go trace it back to the pipeline or the distributor to make sure that their meters are accurate and that they're not, giving you a blend that you're not aware of.
Perfect. Yeah. So I'm not going to have bags all over my pumps the minute I am out of compliance with the
not immediately. Well, there's plenty of opportunity to work with and to correct any issues.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, next question I have here. This one, Grant, maybe you could answer if you want to come up here. The question is, do you envision any other states going to B30 incentives as well? If so, which state do you think's next? Have you heard from other states who are considering this now that Iowa has it?
That's a good question. We've heard that there's been a lot of interest on this. I can't say that any one state I feel like is right around the corner from moving to a higher blend like this at B30. But I do think there are a lot of states that are very interested. They're looking at this, especially as you continue to see a push for reducing carbon emissions and fuel, electrification, those kinds of things. When you move to higher blends of biodiesel, you can achieve those goals fairly easily by continuing to move those blends higher. So I do think this is something that is going to be looked at by other states. OEMs are, of course, taking notice of this as well. So we don't really know of any particular state that has this immediately in their plans, but over the next several years, I think it's possible.
Yeah, thank you, Grant. We've seen that just with incentives, even different state levels. We've seen legislatures in states like Colorado, Wisconsin, Nebraska, and other places starting to look at incentivizing the use of biodiesel. And so just by way of that, we are seeing more and more states start to step into incentives for the use of the cleaner fuel. We have another question that's come in here. I think this one might be for Mike again.
It's for me.
For retailers selling B30, is there a federally approved B30 regulation?
So I think that the question was asking about the labels on the pumps, the B30 cards or the stickers that go on the pumps. So that is one of those strange little areas where it's required by FTC or EPA if you're talking ethanol. But the EPA and the FTC do not actually print those cards or labels or anything. They have specifications for the layout, the font, the letter size, all of that is required, but so you're required to have one of those made and printed. So where do you get that? Large companies that have large chains and several dispensers sometimes make that in-house with their own in-house graphics. Otherwise, I would talk to your fuel distributors. Groups of them get together and provide those. Maybe Iowa Biodiesel can help point you to where you get those. It's the same place that you would get, the current B5 to 20 labels. So they're going to look almost exactly like that. The fonts, the coloring, they're all going to be the same. So whoever's printing those should be able to print B30, B50, any types of those labels.
Okay.
So that's a non-answer, sorry.
Thank you. No, that's good. Yeah, where to find those labels is important, and I believe we have a stack of them here as well. So if people need them, certainly reach out to us. Do we have any more questions come in at this time? It doesn't look like we did. I think we had a terrific discussion here today. The panel was amazing. I'm just thrilled that we were able to get this many experts together in the room. And so we heard some great answers to some of the questions that we had about B30 coming into this. It's really exciting to see Iowa take that first in the nation stance, go to a B30 incentive. We'd start to see OEMs now start to step into it and say, okay, I've got to figure this out. We've got to be sure that people understand that you can use this product in our engines because states like Iowa are going to these higher incentives, and it's just going to drive additional interest in B30 across the board. And so, I applaud Iowa, I applaud you, Grant, and everything that you guys did to make that happen. Mike, for all the work on weights and measures. It's great to hear about Mark using higher blends of biodiesel in his engines, having no issues at all with those, and comfortable going to retail locations and filling up with a B30 with no concerns. And certainly it was great hearing from Dave and some of those technical questions we had, and then Jennifer and the OEM questions. So again, I appreciate everyone for being on the panel. I appreciate all of you for joining us here today on the webinar. And I think you have some contact information from each of the speakers. If you want to follow up with them individually, please do so. And thank you for joining us here today. Have a great rest of your day.